presentation of a new project. So there's, to me, the obvious thing that I would see here is we're only going to see 4 projects in a year, and that is correct. There's the way that we look at it is that there's certain projects that are sort of maintenance related that don't in our typically day-to-day work environment call for a lot of enhancements. But then there's a lot of projects that are also transformational projects that have a heck of a lot of public engagement that probably won't be the typical presentations to this committee either. And it's the ones in the middle that are the projects that are more than maintenance, less than transformational projects that we really think is a sweet spot of where the TAC can give feedback to us to make good improvements to those projects. Now, you may have different opinions on what you'd like to see, and we can obviously tailor information either, there's only so many presentations we could give, but there's other ways that we can present information to the TAC. But we as staff are, aware of maybe a broad range of desires from the TAC, but we hope that you also appreciate that there's, ultimately limited funding. So we want to put the right recommendations into the right projects. I guess an example there would be if there's parallel streets with bike lanes and one in the middle that we're doing a construction job on, we don't necessarily need a bike lane on every parallel street. That's up to you guys to recommend, but we just ask that you keep our budgetary constraints in mind so that we can really move forward with projects and enhance the ones that make sense and hopefully not ask for every bell and whistle on every project. So that's just my request to the team. So what we're gonna do now, if is just really the next item, and Jacob, if you want to lead it, is really just to give folks a chance to talk about what I just presented and how you feel that TAC can contribute, and maybe talk about some of the challenges that I just outlined to you, and then we'll go into the project presentation.
Yeah, I think a few of my thoughts. I think one is, the city is developing a capital budget right now. So is there opportunity for us to be kind of engaged in some of the projects that are included in there kind of early on before it's like, maybe it's a project that's 2 years out, but getting engaged on it a little bit earlier, or even, I understand a lot of this work is very project focused, but are there opportunities to allocate funding to do retrofits of streets that aren't, one of those big projects or a small project or a middle project, but it's just, we know there's an issue on this street, and is there a role that we as a committee can play to kind of provide input or, things we're hearing from residents related to issues they're seeing and funding to actually implement. So I'm thinking more around like the stuff Callie's working on related to traffic calming. Like, is there a role for us related to that work? And then also, and I know we talked on the phone about this, and I'm curious what other people have to say about it, but there are projects that are already being designed that might not be able to incorporate large changes because, like you said, there already are fundings associated with it, but maybe minor changes like adding some traffic calming elements or doing a road diet. I'm thinking of roads like North-South Moreland or East 79th Street, so that the work that we're doing and the contribution we're making isn't just felt, maybe 3 years down the road when this first project is built, but we can start to see changes on our roads now. I'm curious what other people's thoughts are.
Yeah, I would agree with that, especially if there are changes or elements that don't involve big budgetary differences. I can certainly appreciate that we're not going to go back and get different funding for anything necessarily, but if there's tweaks that don't involve changes in budgets and just a different approach to a certain design element or execution thereof, like I could see us providing input there, and I definitely think there should be something regarding those projects that are just kind of maintenance. Whether or not we review every single one but some kind of what we would expect to see as a committee that we haven't been doing in the past, that now we exist as a body to kind of to give our 2 cents on those normal, everyday smaller projects in neighborhoods. Kind of my idea there is, if we can do some of those changes and not ever get to the point where we need to add elements that have, extra budgets like speed tables or something. If there's something about a design or execution of a residential street that we could do on a regular basis to avoid having to spend a lot more money on some larger intervention, maybe our 2 cents would help on that.
And I could say on that point that there's your collective expertise is the type of expertise that could lend itself to some overall strategies to help us implement on a regular basis. So while the folks that are ready to run a project might bristle a little bit about reviewing every single project,
Right.
If we keep in mind that like North and South Morelands, once we're to the point of a construction project about to be awarded,
Sure.
there's only so much that could be
Mhm.
changed. And really, in my head, it would be things that we just completely miss that are just bad for the residents, bad for the bike and ped environment, or maybe some changed element, But then I think there's the opportunity for the TAC to provide overall guidance for how we want to look at a variety of different complete and green elements. We, for instance, have a challenge with tree plantings. Trees are infrastructure. How do you maintain infrastructure when they're on the streets? We're struggling with that. Maybe some of you folks have some things that we can look at, take back internally. It's not really a project-specific comment, but it would be good information that we can take back and talk to urban forestry and maybe come up with a good program. Speed tables is another one that, we're rolling out speed tables in different areas that might not relate to a specific project, but there's the overall bigger conversation as well. And I would say that what we have to figure out is, the projects that aren't in design are the ones that the TAC has review of, that we provide our comments and we document. But we'll have to figure out a way in a different manner for you to provide feedback on other projects. We're not opposed to it, but it wouldn't go through that whole process.
Right.
Just one thing I just want to bring up. Through this process, are we going to look at updating the green space guidelines and typologies and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Because I know that's the last time that was done. I think it was a decade ago.
Mhm.
So it's 2013, I think. So
I would say at this point that is not something that is part of our work. And we're certainly open to talking about the need for that. The typologies are give some general elemental guidance. So basically that 2013 typology document sorts all of our streets across the city into different street types from very large to small, and then based on use. So there's like industrial, commercial, neighborhood streets. So if you imagine a map of the city with a bunch of different lines on every street based on those types, and then it has some design guidance about what types of elements, what configuration is appropriate for different street type. And then there's transit priority overlays and bicycle priority overlays.
Right.
At this point, we're finding that to be a helpful starting point, but we're really looking at this more specific process with this group looking at every corridor independently with that guidance, the starting point about the individual.
And the reason I just brought it up is just speaking to maybe a way to get some of what we talked about here into some of the other projects is as we go through these projects, make suggestions on them. Hey, decide, these are very good elements, maybe that should get written into that booklet, and that can then be unrolled into when projects come alight that maybe don't come to this committee, they can use those as more guidelines, more standards for the city. And so maybe it's not immediate, let's revise it right now so we can use it for this stuff, but maybe our input on these projects then can feed into updating that manual or guideline.
So the complete and green streets ordinance does have some spacing guidance around creation and adoption of design guidelines and standards. And certainly updating our guidance and standards in alignment with what we talk about here is part of the process. I would just say we're not planning to put an RFP out to hire a consultant to make a new technology.
Yeah.
And I sorry I didn't introduce myself at the beginning. I think
Jamie introduced you.
most.
Yeah,
Okay, I'm Callie. I'm really excited to be here with all of you. I wonder, Director, if you could address one of Jacob's remarks about the capital improvement plan.
Oh,
And
yeah.
my understanding is that these projects, like, we're ahead of the capital improvement plan at this point in conversation with these projects. So we really are trying to get very far upstream in order for the time that they're coming onto the CIP with a dollar amount, it already includes all of this feedback and desires of project owners.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. And I'll say that it's a real balance between when it's too early and when it's too late, because I don't want anyone here to get frustrated that you're giving advice and recommendations on a project that won't happen for a couple of years. But that's kind of the reality of it, because if it's something that's about to happen, we've already spent years designing and planning and going after funding, and then it's really tough to get meaningful input put into the plans. So do take a breath and just understand that these projects aren't going to be constructed for several years. Yes.
The schedule that's specific to Shaker Boulevard, is that what would be typical as far as timeframes, as far as the advanced timeframe we have to make comment?
Yes. Yep. Yep.
I think real to the typology question, and this isn't a typology, but Kelly, I don't know if you want to mention, like, this year the city's going to be doing a larger mobility plan update, which could kind of help inform, I think, some of the recommendations we make as well. Which,
Yeah, I know with us, at least with RTA, some of the typologies on the transit overlay, we don't 100% agree with, like some of the pull offs or buses, things like that. And that's why it's not kind of brought it up, it was kind of asked.
Really happy to incorporate changes to that. That is a starting point for us to think about the
Right.
details. And I know you guys are working on some updated bus stop guidelines and things like that might be more comprehensive, so likely we will just use that.
And I guess the other question I have is, so when we make these recommendations on these projects and it does start to get into design, I'm assuming that these projects will still go through the normal sending to various agencies for their review and stuff through the different stages.
Yeah, exactly. So we're injecting this information before that time, so that when we get into the design, you should see something that mirrors up with the list of recommendations and documentation that we make public. Did I answer all your questions? Do you think we yeah, it like Jacob said at the beginning, it's a work in progress. We're just gonna have to see how it goes and hopefully respect each other's sort of push and pull.
I think one thing that might be helpful for future meetings related to the project review would be if it could be included on a map with kind of showing like other connections, like I'm just thinking bikeway connections or transit connections that are there, so we can think of it kind of in the context versus just looking at it, you know, here's Shaker Boulevard, what should it look like? But what is it connecting to? How does it get people to where they want to go based on what recommendations we make?
Good idea, thanks. All right, I think we're gonna head into Rick's presentation on this particular project here.
Just to your point, Jacob, again, Rick Sapolsky, managed engineering construction division for Local. Didn't we send you this map package?
Yeah, but I'm thinking of like a larger, like blown out, like how does this fit in maybe with like a larger east side segment? You know, even for like other planned bike things and existing stuff.
So similar to the information here, but broader in
But-
geography.
Yeah. I mean, like, when I look at this, I'd say, what are we connecting to on the west end of Shaker that would support maybe a protected bike lane on Shaker, so we're not just dropping people off in the middle of nowhere, and whether it's planned in the future or existing, might be helpful.
All right, we get going on this, obviously this is Shaker Boulevard, you see in the green, that's the project, is about 1.7 miles in length. That starts at Buckeye Road, and basically the, if the Coventry area, city park line ends just west of Coventry. A couple of major intersections that pass through MLK, 116 and more. Right now, you all, if you've been out to the area, you can see that we'll be working on Buckeye, that project between Shaker and what's the other one in town, Shaker? Southmore, thank you. That one should be finishing up this spring, and then we'll be starting north-south more than in the spring of this year. So it's gonna be a busy area, and these, last year, in East Ohio was out with the gas line in front of our project. So it's a pretty busy area at this point in time. So if we go to the next slide, Clay. You see the schools that are in this area: Cleveland Arts and Social Science Academy, Intergenerational School, Archie Rice, Williams Academy, which is now closed. Please.
And feel free if anyone has questions along the way to speak up.
Okay, here's the transit services. First one is slightly outside the limits of our project. It's more on Woodhill side. Second one is at East 116th, rapid stop with intersecting bus service. The third is at Moreland, which is another rapid stop with intersecting bus service. The next one, please. Here you see the bike facilities that are related to the Shaker project. We had one at Woodhill, MLK, and also on this 116th Street. This one's displayed. Mark, do you want to speak to this one?
Sure. So, Buckeye Road TLC was completed a couple years ago, and it's now vacant. But through that plan, there were bike routes that were proposed along Shaker Boulevard, to be parallel to Buckeye. And, there are connections between East 116th and East 110th, for, those are existing bike routes, that lead up to regular trails. So it goes down, it goes all the way down to Shaker Boulevard. And the idea was that it would connect into Buckeye, connecting to Buckeye as it goes kind of down the hill. And also connects to the, Drive intersection, which, is currently being planned for. So, hopefully there will be some sort of connection between the bike trails that are planned there. They're looking at potentially doing protected bike lanes along Woodhill. And then there was also previously another plan, when we did Jacob, I think you were a part of that, was the Midway, which talked about potentially bringing Midway on that shorter portion of Buckeye. So it would have to be, if that happens, which I'm sure would be very far off, a way to connect it to that as well. So those are some potential connections throughout the area.
I have a question.
Mhm.
When we plan for infrastructure with this project right now, are we looking at how this relates to infrastructure that already exists in the city of Shaker? That is,
I mean, we look at, even the point of infrastructure that's part of the project itself, like water line. We typically will go to all our utilities and say, what do you have coming up? And we match our projects, because I'll explain a little bit later about how we fund things. That helps us a lot, being able to afford the project. So we certainly look like that. And when we butt up to another community, we'll always ask what you got going on and see how that works. And particularly good example of that right now, currently going on is East 185th Street. We work with Duke, that was actually a two-phase project, individual projects, but we combined them with all God's help so that we have one large project. So people having like 25–30% of them have the rest. Another example will be coming up in the future will be Lee Road. Shaker does have their plans going in, and so do we. We're talking with NOACA now and trying to figure out how best to get those projects put together and move forward. Talking to the county who must possibly help us push that project forward. So we always take a look.
thank you.
Andre, I think that's a really good question to this location specifically. We are in an open conversation with Shaker right now about the Dominican connection that comes up into Shaker and plans that they might have for ways around that. I think another example in this area is the North Southmoreland project. Shaker is just to the north of us for Northmoreland, where in this case they don't have an active project on Northmoreland. So there is some back and forth about we have working to add bike lanes on that street. They are delivering lanes of traffic into the city, and so there is a lot of traffic like this to make them match up. I think Rick's scenarios are examples of very close partnership where projects are aligned, we're in them together. We are partnered all the way from design through construction very closely. And then there are some examples of others where the capital investment might not line up exactly, but we still try and make the broad ends meet in a way that.
Yes, thank you.
Oops.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, that's it. We're getting there. Yeah. Last year. Yeah, no pressure. So we just finished Buckeye, the bike routes. Here we go. Safe routes to school.
There we go. This just shows the safe routes to school, around this project. Safe route to school is a designation given to these areas. It is promoted by the city to ODOT in order to get funding, which ODOT provides 100% of design and construction funding. These type of projects typically look at putting ADA ramps in, fixing sidewalks, pet countdowns, refuge islands, crosswalks. That's crosswalks, be some of the things that's part of those projects. Totally independent of our projects, ODOT designs, administers them based. But those are the safe route to school. All right, next one we're back to Mark.
So these are just the neighborhood plans that are in the area, and I kind of covered some of this. Pride 1593, which recommends reconfiguration intersection of the Shaker, and additional off-road facilities beside of the Buckeye Neighborhood Development Plan. That one actually recommends bike lanes along Shaker Boulevard, and the boundaries of that though goes from Woodhill to 103rd on Shaker Boulevard, so it doesn't go very far as far as this plan is concerned. But I think the idea is that it would continue beyond 103rd. So it had recommendations for bike lanes as well as streetscape improvements like trees, CD areas, and decorative crosswalks. And then Buckeye Road refresh, if you want to just saw the recommendations for bike paths along Shaker Boulevard. This one, they recommended one option, which was to do off-road, like within the sidewalk, have a biking pad potentially, but the one challenge with that is that it would require removal of trees. So if there's a dedicated lane in the street, then you have the issue of removing parking, which is kind of critical around the apartments. So those are the two kind of concerns that you would take into consideration.
Yeah, and if I could just emphasize that the tree point is interesting because anytime you're really replacing the curbs or doing a lot of construction in that area, it could have a pretty negative impact on the trees. So that's something that, we always have to balance out with urban forestry. And there's no great answer to that, but it is something to keep in mind.
All right, we'll get to the good stuff. Maybe a little bit of discussion just prior to getting into some of the details. We talked about the capital program and all those projects we have to look at and plan for the next 3 to 5 years. One of our constraints is that the capital, cap is looking at about $15 million of bond sale. And we have to use that to pay for our local share for all the grants that we're chasing down. So there are limited resources and we have to plan how to move those around. We have different types of grants that we typically go for on road projects. We usually go to NOAC looking for state block grant funds, transportation alternative funds, CMAC funds, congestion mitigation and quality. Those typically all come in with an 80-20 split, 80% federal money, NOAC 20% for the city. So we typically have 4 to 5 projects a year, so we have to balance all that, make sure that we can cover those projects by our local share, which is about $15 million. This particular project, this we'll talk about, we have right now sitting sort of in the bank, about $1 million for this project. It's a state route 87, and it's been designated for maintenance work by the state, which they will give us about $1 million. That $1 million covers just 1.5 inches of asphalt, it's a maintenance type project. And it does not pay for base repairs, it does not pay for ADA ramps, or any of those things. So that's the only money we have available, so anything else we put into this project, it's on the city. And we typically, on this project, obviously, we're gonna go to a full mill and fill, 3.5 inches of asphalt and immediate surface, final coat, base repairs, passing adjustments, ADA ramps, plethora of things that we will put into this project. But right now, as a basis, you look at it, basically it's going there and we got mill and fill, put in the 88 ramps. We always go out, make sure WPC goes out and checks all the drainage areas, so all the catch spaces are clean and working. Urban forestry comes out and does a tree assessment. There'll be a trim or remove dead trees. Another thing that we include, obviously, down there is plastic markings since it's asphalt. So when we looked at it with our interdepartmental group, with about 10 different departments getting together, the list that you now see are things that we'd like to do. Not necessarily we can do all of these, but these are what we want to consider with this project. Obviously, we're not in design. A lot of these items will be answered during design, but when we scope the project, most of these will be in there. I'm not explaining what only most of them will be in there. We would like to look at, depending on budget, replacing, repairing sidewalk, curb, driveways as needed. We typically don't do the entire skirting sidewalk area because of the cost. It is the responsibility of the residents, the homeowners, and businesses, but we try to help on our capital projects. We have the funds of getting everything into compliance. We're looking at upgrading signalized intersections, down pedestrian signals at MLK. East 116th, East 103rd, 121st. Install high visibility crosswalks across all ways at the intersections at MLK, East 116th, East 103rd, East 121st. Provide bicycle facilities either on street or a bike path. So that's the thing we will study during this project. Obviously, the departments out there, we have to balance parking and everything else as to how best to serve the community. Upgrade traffic signals, increase visibility at Shaker Square, MLK, East on 21st Street, incorporating signage or neighborhood identity recommendations from the Buckeye Neighborhood Plan. Provide additional street trees as needed, and that director made a good point about that. We now started wanting to introduce new trees into the program. In the past, we relied on urban forestry, but the city's desire to have a green big canopy, we want to start adding trees into the project as best we can. One thing we did mention is when you go back and think about sidewalk curbs and aprons, putting in a curb is almost forbidden by urban forestry because that curb you're seeing has another 12 inches underground. So we have to open that all up, and that means you go through the root system. Go through the root system, you're going to do major damage to the tree. So we're very careful where we put curb nowadays, and we have to have a long conversation with urban forestry if we can do that or not. Something we struggle with. A lot of people want the curbs for drainage, that's what they're for. But we still have to consider the tree and we have to walk that tight road. Let's see where This is one of the electrical vehicle charging stations recommended for Shepherd Boulevard and citywide planning study. There is an RFP out currently, it's looking throughout the city for sites. It's, in my opinion, this will be part of another project to put the EV station in, if they're recommended for Shaker, because we're using our bond money for putting that in right away. I'm not sure if we can do it or not, but this other plan will have separate funding to put in EV stations. So they are being thought about, it's a reality, but it probably won't be a part of this project. Upgrading the street parking meters so they can accept credit cards, another one of those things. That project will probably be done through our public works group who handles all our parking meters. It may fall to us, I don't think it will, but I think it'll be a separate project when they go out and start looking to get that. And of course, coordinating our and the maintenance of the brick wall, while you're railroad stretch. So we always try to coordinate with our partners, make sure we have everything taken care of and not missing. So those are the things that the city would like to do. And Jamie talked to y'all today earlier. This would be then the opportunity for y'all that can comment what else you think you might want to put in. So I got one or two more slides, but that's about where we're at now. So next thing, a little bit about schedule.
And we'll come back to this slide and so when we have conversation.
Next one, please. But just a little bit about the tender schedule is one of the big reasons it's tentative is that the issue one application we will submit is a highly competitive field. It says probably, I think last time, Angela, how many applicants were there?
Almost 50 applications received. Some are unsafe.
So you have to have a very competitive application. So while we're planning to do that, we will have a good candidate that we will get funding through there. It's not a done deal until it's over. Without that money, there is no project. So hopefully we'll have that. How the city handles projects, Tom Boyer will go through with the staff and look at a lot of the city streets. And I think there's 10 scoring categories. It's actually objectively scored. And they look at this, they do pre-ranking, pre-scoring of these projects, make a determination which one will have a very good chance of scoring well with mission one. Other things we look at when we do mission one is that when you have urban paving funds, that can be used as a local part of your local match. When you have utilities that you do, like water lines, sewer lines, funds that we get from CWD and WPC, those can be used as a local match too. So that helps us direct how we want to go, whether it's to be that time for little NOACA or for issue one fund. Those considerations are always part of what we look at.
And just to pause you, Rick, so if you guys are wondering, why did we peg this for the issue one funding? It's because that analysis was done and they determined that it would score well for the issue one funding. So there's sort of a, analysis of all of our projects to see what peg they'll fall, which hole these pegs will fall into the best. And those are the applications that we see.
As a non-professional, can I ask what issue one is and what the funding is?
Yeah. Actually, what we voted for, either yes or no, it's a state issue that's put on the ballot.
Yeah.
And it's for infrastructure repairs. Okay. So hopefully you voted yes.
I probably did.
Yeah. So each area has their own committee that doles out funding based on the applications.
Yeah. Not for now, but it'd be interesting to see what the 10 categories for grading are.
We should provide that.
Just a little bit more about issue one is, the more you know about what we have to do, the better it is.
Sure.
Getting federal funds through our, NOACA, that's typically 80-20. There's other programs that are 95-5 or 100. But with competitiveness of issue one, part of that is how much local money you're putting into the project. So we're sitting about 60-40 now, 60 grant money, 40 bond money. So if you think back to our $15 million, we're hitting that harder. So that's why we look for projects with utilities that we're going to be replacing. Shaker Heights, we have one, it's from Shaker Square out to the west, to the Coventry area. So that's funding we can use to offset part of that local match. So it's really a balancing act, knowing that you have that 15
right,
and how best you insert it in all the other places. And that's to try to maximize what's eligible for funding. So that's all it's out.
So to maybe reiterate a little bit what Rick said when he talks about 80-20, 60-40, 90-10, that's our match requirement that shares with federal money, usually sometimes state as well. So usually the smaller number is the percent required for local share, a minimum percent that we use to leverage that broader percentage of external funding. And to Rick's point, because we have only 15 million in bonds annually spread across all capital needs, not just roadways, we try really, or are those just for roadways?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry,
Yeah.
just for roadways, we try really hard to leverage those for these external funds as much as possible. So every local dollar, we want to be pulling in 80%
Right.
of federal money or whatever state share we can get so that our local dollars are multiplied as far as possible.
Just to confuse you more.
Yeah.
Not only do we use that $15 million for capital project, we have annual programs that we have to use that money for, like that tree damage sidewalk program, our 50/50 program. There's others too that $15 million have to be residential resurfacing program that one has to feed. So it has a lot of bites taken from it. We have to be judicious how we use that and where we put it at. Putting in there is fundable.
And I realize I'm getting into the weeds probably too much, but so the 15 million, it's a bond issue and it's repaid by the general fund or?
Yep.
Okay. And then and how is the 15 million as a quantity determined?
That's, I would say that, I mean, traditionally, the city has about 50 million of bonding capacity.
Okay.
And, traditionally, the 15 million, is what was allocated for our road and bridge needs. I think it's a function of what our capacity is to, construct, because we have to actually put that into productive use. But also, a function of just sort of looking at the overall needs of the city that could be funded through bonding, and that's the allocation.
Cool, thanks. Sorry, appreciate the tangent.
Yep. And I should say too, as we go forward, especially the folks that don't do this every day, just ask questions. Say, hey, I remember last time you talked about whatever. Can you go over that again? Because the more you learn about our daily life, then the more impactful your recommendations are going to be on us. So don't ever be shy about asking for clarification or to go over something again.
All right, I'll continue then. Just a tentative schedule here. Obviously, we have a committee meeting today. We get together again soon. Go through our responses to the improvements that we want to see. As far as the project is going, our request for proposals for the design of this project, we have taken between December 23rd, 2023 and May 2024. That's by the time it takes to put it on the street, meaning that we send it out to various consultants. They then put their RFP together. We have to sit down and explore the RFPs, and then we go through a process of having that approved for legislation and such.
Rick, I have a question on, within this schedule, at what point is there a meeting with the community about the design? Is that before the RFP or after the RFP?
Traditionally, let's go what we traditionally do and what we're doing or thinking about doing at this point in time. Traditionally, it came afterwards. We would get to 30% design, but we take a step back. We would go and look for TLCIs. We talk to the planning folks, understand what we need, what we put in the scope. In terms of an actual public engagement, that didn't happen until we had the 30% plan, something we can show this is where we're going. Then we have one meeting during design, and at that point, we would then move to final design into construction, another public meeting to discuss that. Lately, we've actually enhanced that. We've had multiple meetings. We've seen we had it on Morelands, we had it on West Franklin. You see that more and more engagement is necessary. Right now, we have an RFP out for public engagement, how we run it. Director wanted to have that so that we can figure out what we can do in addition to reach the public, to make sure they're engaged, at what point in time the best to engage them, to be consistent in that engagement, and to have everyone running on that same path. Because we have other folks doing public engagement out of LoCap too. So we want to make that uniform and make that impactful on the community. So yes, we started here kind of in a dark age. Hopefully now we come see the light moving forward a little bit.
And if I could pause, we're gonna start inviting the TAC to these public engagement meetings. Don't feel like you have to go. You won't have a role at the meeting, but just to get you acclimated to what we typically do. And you're welcome to be engaged, but don't feel that you have to go to all these meetings. So we have a couple coming up that are closer to one in particular closer to the construction side, and then we'll be rolling into other community meetings going forward.
And another thing we started doing, and it's getting to be quite common, we got websites for all our projects. Some are starting to design, some are starting to system what into construction because we're trying to catch up. And we'll have the East 140th Street's gonna go to construction shortly. That website will be open in probably a month. Got a number of other ones currently open. They kept the rest of the construction where it's going, where we're at. We're looking at completion dates, phone numbers, to call people. So we're trying to be more engaged and we'll continue to progress that. So going back to the schedule, it's a design we hope to have on board. Start that in June of 2024, finish that up in August of 25. In July of 2024, in July of any year at this point in time, issue 1 applications on how Public Works Commission applications are due. So we will be submitting for this project based on the scope that we finally come to understand is what that we want. We don't get the results of that until about December. So at that point, we'll know if we have a project. Those funds become available to fiscal year, so they become available in following July. So July 2025, if we were successful, we would have those funds and receive the construction. We'll be out there sometime in 2026. Give us time to bid the project and have it go out. And typical couple of months to execute contracts and things like that. So as I mentioned earlier, death on this one. ODOT are paving funds about $1 million. Looking at applying for issue 1. It has to be for rough guess. We're looking at this project coming out, let's say probably $8, $7, $8, $9 million, depending on how we put this together, how we put local shares together, and what we're trying to get. So we all know that we have problems with the construction market. It went up 14% last year, so I'm giving you numbers that could easily change. But trying to understand best and giving a sense of where it probably will be when it ends up. That's where we're at. So with that, I think that questions. So I want to go back to
So with that, I think we're gonna put it over to you, Jacob, and we'll, this is the comment, questions, discussions.
I know I have some thoughts, but I'd be curious if anybody else has any first.
Yeah, I mean, I got a couple of pages I put together before we get here.
Oh yeah, that's great.
Because I mean, I didn't know to what level you wanted, so I can go through my comments and then some of them might be a little more detailed at this point than what's needed. It might be more something as you're going through the actual design at this stage.
And Brian, I'll just say, anytime somebody wants to do that, we review them verbally so everyone hears, but then send it to us afterwards.
Yeah, I can do that. So I sat down with some of our planners and our operation guys that kind of went through this project. We kind of looked at each of the intersections and just overall as a quarter and kind of put some thoughts down. One is bike lanes. We do feel this is a good opportunity for bike lanes, especially along the center, along the tracks. We have the kind of retaining wall. It's a nice, easy, protected way to put them without any curb cuts, things like that, because it's a nice, long stretch. You just got breaks at the intersections. You did mention here about the maintenance of the brick wall abutting the railroad. We just ended up rebuilding that. Finished it 2 years ago. So it's been all replaced. Yeah, so we cast it on the bases, redid all the brickwork, the caps, We actually went on the inside of the trackside and rehabilitated all that as well. So if there's an opportunity, I guess, to get a little more width to the roadway to put the bike lanes in, there's that tree line that's there. It's only about 4 foot or so. But all the trees there are recessed into the wall and they're on little protected areas, a way to maybe add a few extra feet if we needed some for a bike lane type thing. The sidewalks, again, I know you mentioned where you could. The one area that we've noticed that they're in pretty bad shape is between MLK and 116th Street. There's not much of sidewalk left in that area. The grass is kind of taken over. It's more like a little 2-foot strip. In some areas it's missing.
And Brian, that's on the south side.
I'm sorry?
That's predominantly on the south side?
Correct, yeah, the south side there. Pedestrian crossings, I know you mentioned at the primary intersections, put them on all 4 quadrants. I guess we'd like to see them at all the bridge crossings on all 4 quadrants. A lot of the bridges have those kind of plaza areas on them that don't really get utilized. We think by adding those crosswalks, it'll help kind of get a little more pedestrian, I guess, options as they can move from one side of the street to the other. The overall stretch, I know RTA has the train stops and has some cross traffic, but we also do run our replacement bus along here. So we just wanted to keep that in mind that we do have replacement bus stops. So anytime we're shutting down the line for maintenance, the buses do run up and down Shaker Boulevard. So we just need to keep that in mind. We can work with the city as usual, like where those bus stops are located and whether there could be bump outs for them, things like that. So at Buckeye Woodhill intersection in general, I liked how you mentioned the Thrive 105 corridor. We thought that was the important thing to just look at how that project then ties into this one. So I believe on that one, there's a multi-use path going on the east side. So somehow it would then connect into if there's some kind of bike pathway going down Shaker Boulevard. We do find that intersection somewhat of a dangerous one in our mind, just how it interacts with Hill to Shaker. On the westbound lanes, one thing we'd like to look at is there's that kind of median area where the right turn lane is divided by from the straight. It's a kind of an extra wide turn there. Looks like it's almost 2 lanes turning, but it's only a single right turn lane. There's a way to expand that median or something, just to kind of narrow it down and create a quicker pedestrian path across. On the Buckeye side, again, we like that, and I can't remember part of the Buckeye Wood project if there's a crosswalk going in at Buckeye and Shaker. I couldn't.
Brian, just to clarify, the Buckeye Woodhill Shaker intersection itself is not part of this project. We started
Just eat. Okay, well, that's right. I couldn't tell from the map, so that's why I was bringing this stuff up.
The comments about the meetup are really helpful, but I think the intersection itself to be part of the one.
Okay, so we can reserve those comments for that project. Because I had another crazy thought, but maybe that's another for that project, was instead of where Shaker dies into Buckeye right now, if there's a possibility of moving that connection a little bit east into where it lines with 99th Street to give you a kind of more space between that Woodhill intersection, shut Shaker that in. Because whenever I drive through that area, it's a scary intersection for me because it's like trying to figure out where to go and turn, or you're allowed to, or from bus area and curve in and stuff.
Does that come up at all, Martha?
I haven't heard that.
Yeah, I know the sewer
In
district.
terms of the difficulty of navigating the intersection, yes.
Yeah, I know the sewer district redid that kind of point area after they got done with the tunnel project, and now it's a park. But
Right.
you know where it ends, it's kind of about where the 99th, and I don't know what that church there, but they have control.
Much attention.
Yeah, but 103rd, we thought it was a little too narrow to really try. So at first, it's like, oh, just move down to 103rd, kind of bring it in, and then you could extend that part to the rail line, maybe a multi-use path can come in and transition in the Shaker. But I don't think you can really get the room on the 3rd to do anything. At East 116th, see, the Marathon gas stations and the Sunoco right there. We didn't know if there's a possibility on reworking their entrances and exits. For the Sunoco, for the, I said, the northbound entrance on 116th, it's actually past the stop bar for the light, so the traffic stopping the entrance past it. But they have, two on Shaker, another one on 116th, and the one on whatever that side street is. So we didn't know if that one could be closed off. On Marathon side, again, they have that kind of entrance exit that's just past the stop bar on the southbound side. Again, maybe that gets reworked with the sidewalks where it's an entrance only and a right turn exit only. Just because people crossing, I know when we were doing our construction there, that's where the pedestrian got hit from somebody running that red light trying to sneak past and come out of that gas station, even click on the contractors. Station. Okay, Shaker Square. One thing along Michael's Diner on the westbound Shaker Boulevard side, there's a stretch of kind of unmarked parking be on the south side of the street right there. So I was talking internally if we can look at, I know our TA's can look at whether that's needed as parking or drop off for the diner itself. So there might be a possibility to minimize that area and get a bump out so that it kind of aligns with the Shaker Square side of the street. Kind of minimize that crosswalk as well.
So that's like right behind Michael's Diner.
Yeah, there's kind of a parallel parking area. It's just a yellow stripe and then probably about 8 foot. It's not really marked or signed anything. And then you get into that angled parking area.
Oh,
So
okay.
potentially, that crosswalk could bump out, reduce that crosswalk width. And then maybe sign that as, hey, it's drop off only, or I don't really know if there's parking needed because you have 8 or 9 spots past it as well. Let's see here, on eastbound Shaker Boulevard, kind of that western corner, there's that right turn lane. We didn't know if that could be right now there's a straight left turn, a straight, and then a right turn only lane. We didn't know if that right turn only lane could be eliminated and then be a straight and right turn, and then a no right turn sign put in its place, similar to what you do traveling. That'd be traveling westbound, entering the square on the other side. That's a no right turn and kind of a shared lane.
You guys get that or should we?
Yeah, the issue is right there is it's the stop bar is pretty far back from the crosswalk, so you can't really see around that corner. So anybody kind of making that right turn is doing it somewhat blind.
Okay.
So no right.
Yeah, no right turn, and then we thought, if there's a no right turn red, you really need 2 straight lanes and then a right turn only lane.
Eastbound Shaker,
I'm sorry?
Eastbound Shaker.
Shaker the Square.
Yeah, so the westbound's where I'm talking about, but the eastbound, that's the way it's marked right now, is there's a straight and a right turn lane and combined, and there's a no right turn into the square. So we think it should be treated the same way on the other side, and then that's where you could maybe, again, bump it out, to give you some room to add some additional parking if you need it, and then also reduce that kind of crossing width.
And you're saying no right turn on. So you just.
And then, again, on the others, actually on the Shaker eastbound, there is a right turn only lane, but again, it's marked no right turn on red. So I don't know if there's any need for that lane again, if it could just be bumped out and provide some parking there and then shorten that crosswalk distance. The Van Aken intersection, again, along the north side, we didn't know if there could be, this would be the westbound Shaker Boulevard side. Again, adding bump outs for the parking and try to reduce that crossing width. And then on the south side of that street, right now it's kind of an extra wide pavement area where you have 2 lanes where they turn left on the Shaker. You can kind of see in the aerials where the kind of travel lane is. If there's a way to bring that sidewalk further out and kind of square up that crosswalk. kind of reduce that distance. That's another intersection right there. I'm always nervous because it's between crossing the train tracks and all the pavement, just trying to make sure I'm going the right way.
Is it?
Yeah, so it'd be the other side of the street there. Yeah, you can kind of see how kind of both lanes kind of turn left, but then you kind of have the asphalt right there. Kind of bringing that out a little further and then squaring off that crosswalk. Yeah, right in there, kind of reworking that a little bit.
As long as we're here, sorry. This is Van Aken technically, but it might matter for y'all as you design and engineer this. But I mean, does Van Aken need to be 2 lanes crossing there? And if not, we can probably lose a lot of pavement, and that might some of these changes to make the crossings be a lot easier on Shaker might be a lot easier.
Yeah, and that was
Now I know that's probably beyond this, but having that in mind, if possible, to lose a second lane might, like, planning for that might impact how you look at that. I mean, it might not, but I mean, I just question if there's traffic enough to need 2 lanes across those tracks.
And speaking to that, so as you're traveling eastbound on Shaker, where you have the turning on to Van Aken, you kind of that right turn arrow, and where the crosswalk is, it's pretty far back. And if you go to Street View looking that way, it's all blocked by trees. You cannot see that crosswalk whatsoever. So that was one where we're like, well, do you really need that free right turn lane through there? Or could it, again, be shrunken down where it's a straight right turn and somehow bump out that curb line in order to square off the the crosswalk and bring it closer to Shaker Boulevard? Because right now it's a little bit ways down Van Aken as you make that turn.
Is this?
There.
I'm sorry, you have to go overhead. I can't.
It is.
It is. That's, you're looking straight at where you're kind of truck.
Yeah, right.
He would make that turn.
That's like super wide and a shallow angle that will just speed.
Yeah, so go to about where that truck is and then turn left the other direction. Stop on.
I think with an eye on time, Jake, that would be that, especially since you already have all your schedule, right? It's pretty clear.
Yeah, I'll send this to you. That was my last comment, honestly, actually. Because Coventry is out of, they said, oh, well, what about Coventry? But that's Shaker Heights, so I guess you're not gonna fill that one for us.
No, not that.
But yeah, so here's where you have that right turn lane, and you get a right turn arrow on here, a green arrow. And as you move towards the intersection, you can't see that crosswalk around the corner. So again, this is where maybe you do a bump out, and that's parking along there, and then it's the only 1 lane turning right. And then you can kind of bring that crosswalk more squared up to the intersection, so you can actually see people crossing, things like that. So I can let our people talk.
Awesome comments. Thank you. Thanks for reviewing it in advance too.
Well, let's just keep it going down the road here, right? Obviously, the sewer district is most interested in seeing how the project could benefit the combined sewer system in this area. We're always looking for opportunities to remove stormwater from the system for obvious reasons. There's already there's all kinds of our infrastructure in this area, of course. But at the west end, I don't know how familiar everybody is with the layout, but at the very west end, it was mentioned already that we do have one of our, what we call an Appendix 3 project, the plaza area at the point. Some of the street runoff is picked up, a couple of sets of catch basins at the west end, westbound lanes, picks up runoff, and directs it into our underground detention system that sits under that plaza. I didn't get clarification, but we're looking at the possibility that more water might be able to be sent there with the reconfiguration of storm sewers, perhaps. The storm sewers that are there now are, I believe, the ones we put in to support that project 5-6 years ago. Also, right in that immediate area on the north side of the westbound lanes is the East End Neighborhood House. Ubuntu Gathering Place is a project that we funded, a green infrastructure project that picks up runoff from the street as well. One new curb cut that was done in that area. So be aware of that. So we're starting to see some green infrastructure established in that area. Great, we could find opportunities to do more of that. Realize that's just more money that's needed to make that happen. And that's pretty clearly spelled out here. If we want these extra elements, we have to find extra funding likely. So I have a couple of questions. As far as it says additional funding needed to do these things, are there any, I'm not a funding guy, so but need to learn how that all works. But are there any limits or restrictions to additional funding sources that we should be aware of a project like this to do, and of course, in our interest, stormwater management?
Well, a couple things. One is it's not just building, say, a new glass well, but also our capacity to maintain, because we currently need to better our maintenance, obligations. But the big constraint is it needs to. So I like your idea of diverting more stormwater into existing bioswales because it's not something that we maintain, and it already exists. But big picture is we have to own the land, that it has to be right of way or something that we own in order to have money spent. So it could be existing right of way, or if I don't know if the tree line is RTAs or not, right along the walls, but we would have to have property rights.
Yeah,
in order
I'm not
to
sure where
use those. So that's one big constraint. But we'll have Rick talk to other constraints for stormwater.
And then, for argument's sake, if additional funding was made available and it worked out,
Yeah.
the long-term needs and whatnot, when in this process and that schedule does that need to be identified and secured to make sure it's part of the project?
So Rick, the question is, are there any constraints on funding with regard to stormwater infrastructure enhancements, and not just the regular catch basins?
Well, just take a step back first. What funds we can't chase for this job? The funds were administered by the state. They're actually federal funds, so we can't mix federal funds up with STBG funds that we would chase at NOACA. So those funds would be used on this project. In terms of funding for infrastructure, I'm not aware of any that. The only time I remember getting some infrastructure funding was from regional Fleet Avenue, and tennis space, and that's over there. And we think we have some other green infrastructure money we received through some CDCs that apply. But in terms of we're putting in infrastructure solution stuff, that's as far as I know, that's just WBC's funding that they use to perform that work. They, taste grants and stuff, they have to go and do that. And there's once that, not that it shouldn't be done, it couldn't be done. Once they do that, now we got street construction down into the whole area. So it presents challenges if it's something that's feasible. Practice correct, we can always spend our money in the right of way, so the connection to that retention facility would have to have some use for us to connect the right of way. So I don't know if I'm answering the question.
Yeah, a little. I'm completely foreign to the funding mechanism for this type of project, so.
And
I think
part of
right, so
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
a we want the funding strategy with this project.
We'll be submitting for the issue 1 grant in October, July. So probably we have that 24. So during the 23, we have to figure out what we need to have done. So in terms of what else we can chase, if there's other funding sources that are available.
and that's why we're at the tech now versus later on in the year. But if I could just add, if you talk to folks at the district, I mean, that would be great feedback for us. If there's a typical type of funding that we typically don't go after that could fund some initiatives. It's not to say that we would go after it on every project, but it'd be nice to have a tool belt with different tools for different types of projects that we know that we have some additional funding sources to go after.
Just a couple other comments right now. I mean, just generally, the project lends itself well to implementing stormwater management options, in that, there's well over 100 foot of elevation change from extent to west. So there's a lot of slope there that allows you to peel off water into the right of ways if that works. So that's I'm just going off of, is it a suitable site for stormwater management as a whole? And it looks possible. One option to think about is if additional trees are desired. It sounds like they are. There's ways to incorporate trees into stormwater management as well. Instead of just planting a tree boxes that are sunk into the ground a little bit, that actually take in stormwater off the right of way. It's something that has been done, and it'd be nice to see more of that. If we try to find it.
Are those 3 boxes connected to something, or are they just infiltration?
They can be. They can have typically you'd have an underdrain, because in case if you didn't have an underdrain, it could not drain properly and kill the tree. So the underdrain is really there as a technical measure. That can tie it right back into the storm. I don't know if you're familiar with what a bioretention cell is, but they're miniature bioretention cells that accept 1, maybe 2 trees.
Details associated with those tree boxes there on the website?
Is there what? I'm sorry.
Details available on your website?
We don't have any kind of specification for it at all. It's just a standard GI practice that can be used in a tight setting in this type of area. There's all kinds of information about on various manufacturers' websites. But I can certainly find a couple of the better ones and send you links to those. And the other thing that was mentioned as well is another opportunity would be the bump outs that we mentioned to create lanes into parking areas. Those bump outs could be utilized as stormwater management features as well. If they're going to be, instead of having just a typical landscape bump out or a concrete bump out, that's an opportunity for a bioretention cell or street lane.
Just a word on bioretention cells, bioswale. We've done them in the past, and our problem is maintenance.
I know.
And they get ugly in a hurry if they're not maintained and they don't work well.
Yeah, and it's
So
not just the city, it's private owners as well that have those same issues.
we shy away from them because of that reason. There's no one, we don't have the ability to maintain them. People who sign up to maintain them eventually just fall away, and it just doesn't work very well for the investment that's made in that.
No, I completely understand. Ones that were put on 59th Street are really well done and seem to be well maintained. As soon as cities, well, I think those are being maintained by the CDC in town for the most part. Those are the partnerships that recognize as ways to resolve that issue. We fully acknowledge, the city's not ramped up yet to perform that type of maintenance. No idea when and if that will happen. But
Just
for us,
that's a priority of the administration, to have maintenance ramped up.
it's a priority.
Yeah, it really
It's gonna
is.
take time, because you're coming from a place that's dark, to get up higher, so to say. So it takes time, but it is a priority, because there are a lot of things, not only in terms of bioswales, just in maintaining other green elements that we really want to be able to accept and take care of.
Well, it's good to hear that, because we'll certainly would like to be engaged with that process as far as how did we get there. So we have a strong interest in seeing and doing more of this opportunity.
You guys do a nice job with the Fleet Avenue bioswale.
Yeah, and it's not easy, it's not cheap. We understand, we know where this process.
There was a project.
I think that's what I have for now.
A couple thoughts and questions. What is the demand for the EV charging stations, Shaker Boulevard? Is that something that people have expressed interest in using a lot?
Who knows most about that?
I don't think anyone here is very familiar with the city of Brooklyn. As director mentioned, there's an RFP going out now to get interest of, I believe, private contractors to own that equipment and place them. So I would say we're very much in the needs assessment phase of, like, we know this technology exists in Huntsville. We know there are limited charging opportunities across the city. We know that switching from gas to electric is kind of the direction that we're going generally from a perspective. I think the exact strategy, demand, timeline of that transition is something that we're still trying to figure out, but it's something that we're trying to think about now, because we're making investments so that as that does evolve and grow, we're not totally behind. But I think director said that will likely be a different project coming over. The big project as our undersea.
That study that's out there, our folks evaluating various sites that they think would be appropriate sites for EV stations. So I guess once that's, it's out of the Department of Sustainability. So I guess that would get vetted at some point in time. So it's down the road as to how that's going to be done.
And if you look at our website, or maybe sustainability's website, I could send you a link, but the RFP is currently active and out there. Yeah.
And then I was looking at this here with the sidewalks, and I was wondering what this is right here. I know this is different from the rest, but I'm not sure if anybody knows what that is. Or if they're on the bottom. But I'm seeing cracks and grass growing and things of that nature. So I think if you were using a wheelchair, for example, or maybe pushing a stroller, it would be a little difficult to do that here. And even if small portions of this are broken, you often in the city see people in the street using the street as a method to.
Are you looking, I'm sorry, I just looking at the bottom right hand bottom quadrant.
Yes.
Give you background on sidewalks and who maintains them, who's responsible to fix them. The city ordinance, which is common to many cities across the nation, the resident is responsible for fixing their sidewalks. Or I should say the building owner. So if it can be a business, it could be a resident, it could be whatever. Responsibility of that sidewalk belongs to that person in terms of maintaining it. Definition of a sidewalk is that it extends from the curb to the property line. So while there's a tree lawn sitting there and curb and other things, that's the definition. So when you're responsible for the sidewalk, it's that entire area from the curb, space of curb, to the property line. What the city has and what we do, we have the ability to go out and cite people and issue violations. Citation is what we use for residential properties. It strongly encourages folks to go out and fix the sidewalks. The city offers a 50-50 program, whereas you pay half, we pay half, as the sidewalk gets fixed. That can include drive apron, the curb, and other things that you may want that's in that area over there. For businesses, it's a violation. Violations, you have to do the work. You are required to do so, or basically the city's going to do it for you and charge you. So that's how our ordinances are set up. That I agree with you. That's not ADA compliant. It needs to be taken care of. And those are the techniques, the methods the city uses.
And then one more thought here, and I'll cut it here so everybody gets when we look at grass and the maintenance of that in the city, are we also looking at any alternative native ground covers? You know, plants that are from Ohio that grow about 2 or 3 inches that you could plant that wouldn't be as caustic on resources or time or energy. I know the city has a problem right now with getting people there to do the work and kind of stay on top of it. So just wanted to know from a kind of a urban forestry perspective, if we look at any alternatives, we can talk about grass.
So I can take this one. So we are exploring a clover product. Yeah. So we have a couple locations that started last year. And then we're looking at different types of situations, some in the right of way, some portions of parks, that are sort of, we have a lot of larger parks with areas that really aren't used to recreate, but they, need cut all the time. So and then also land bank lots. So I think the tests that we did last year were all land bank lots, but this year we're looking at some test locations in right of way areas just to see how that actually works out. So more to come, but we do have a Clover program that we're trying to explore.
And then one more question, I'm sorry about that. I was looking and it says that a portion of Shaker Square is a intermodal connector to the highway system. I was wondering, what is the goal when people drive through that area? Are we looking to calm traffic, or are we looking to make this almost an expressway, a throughway for people to get from one area to the next? I can kind of see it. I'm looking for an answer.
Oh, but so the Cali.
The goal is not to make it like an expressway, especially, and that's why we highlight the transit service, the safe routes to school designations, the bike connections, etc. The goal of this committee and the city's goal in introducing and passing the ordinance is really to make these streets complete for all users, not predominantly be a vehicular street path. I think Tom or Rick might be the best to speak to the intermodal designation specifically, or maybe like from Noaca. So we have several streets across the city that have that designation in place. I would rely on someone else to explain exactly what that means.
What does it mean and what
Or
are
we can
they?
get back to you.
Yeah. It's trying to be well, okay, the principle is we have road classification. State Route 87 is called the principal arterial. And that arterial really connects western area of the city, eastern area, highly urbanized area. That's the function of state route. Connect highly urbanized areas. And that multimodal connection probably has the transit in relation to state route 87.
Just a little bit more of that, not to belabor the point. Classification of a roadway, federal classification is a means of getting funded. If you don't have a federal classification on a particular roadway, you can't get fundings from Mr. May at NOACA. So, and then NOACA actually sets up classifications, they can change classifications if ODOT asks them. So that's all done on that side. With the intermodal, the National Highway System is another funding mechanism. It's more for multimodal that's being used by trucks to move material and such. So there's another funding source on top of other funds that they can use to fix that roadway. Am I saying that right, Ed?
Essentially, yes.
I think I've been to enough meetings.
It comes down to the eligibility for various types of funding programs, all of which are FHWA, but the purpose they serve, it's on a freight network or if it's on a, interstate or that it qualifies it for federal funding.
Thank you. No more questions.
Want me to go first? You want to go? I'll go next. I only had a little bit of time to look through this, and because of my job, I looked primarily at the bicycle facility. And I had two options that I had drawn up on Street Mix, and I can send these around. I only printed a few copies, 10 copies, so. I was curious, I know there's, in the packet, you talked about doing a parking study to see if on-street parking is really needed on Shaker Boulevard. I did look at an aerial map, and it does seem like there were a lot of open spaces on side streets, as well as some parking lots behind the buildings that I assume are permitted based on the residents of the buildings. But I put together two options that, one, keeps the parking, assuming that the parking is needed, which I don't think it is. And then one option that proposes actually moving the bike facility conversation all to the westbound side of Shaker Boulevard, where there are no curb cuts primarily, and making a two-way cycle track connection, still allowing where there's majority, actually all of the parking it looked like on Google Satellite View to still exist on the eastbound side. Alternatively, removing the parking if it isn't necessary and putting in some planters, maybe some linear green stormwater capture, if something like that's feasible. It's not my wheelhouse, so I'm not sure. But these are the two that kind of came to my mind, and I'm thinking of, connecting to hopefully a protected facility or some sort of facility on North and South Moreland in the future. And then connecting as well to the bike lanes on MLK, but also ultimately connecting to the Lake to Lakes Trail to get people further east or west into the University Circle and further into downtown.
Jacob, could you speak briefly to any thought about this curbside bike facility versus the central line that Ryan mentioned?
Yeah, the center line did come to my brain. I didn't draw it up, but I think that would be a good facility too. I think for option 2 you're looking at here, you basically just move it to closer to the trains and move the driving lane the other way, or the other option, similarly, just flip it. That's kind of what we as Bike Cleveland proposed for North-South Moreland. Yeah, and I also think the two-way option fits in with a lot of the other conversations around roadways in this area. Lee Road, Shaker Heights is talking about a two-way cycle track option. Hopefully the city continues that as well. And I think they're also thinking about a two-way facility for Van Aken as well as kind of their preferred option. So it's not a facility that would be unfamiliar in the near future. What was that, Callie?
Right.
Oh, and Thrive 105 as well, yeah. Markham. That was my thought. I echo everybody else's comments, specifically around stormwater capture. I think that's an animal would be great to tackle, but also the pedestrian experience and the sidewalks as well as the crosswalks. And I often get confused at that Buckeye Wood or the Woodhill Shaker intersection. Am I in the right lane to go continue on to Buckeye, or what are the cars next to me to do? So those are my thoughts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that leads me to kind of most of my thoughts, and that also echoes what Andre was saying. If you're in a wheelchair or using a stroller or a walker or some sort, there's a lot of these intersections that are just intimidating to the point of dangerous. And that's a couple questions going on the same line of thought. So this is a 24-foot right of way.
Curb to curb.
Curb to curb, right. Sorry, yeah, curb to curb. Does anyone know offhand when the last time it was repaved was?
Tom, do you know?
90s.
Okay.
90s.
I can tell you from experience then, if this is repaved and those lanes continue to be 12-foot wide, you're gonna, those crash numbers are gonna go up. Because I've been in a car on Shaker Boulevard driven by an older kid when I was a kid, and we hit like 115, and it was probably newly repaved if it was the 90s. That was a little further east of there, but I think a lot of dangerous driving doesn't happen specifically because of the road conditions right now. The fact that there's so many cracks and bumps, and around every sewer on the right curb side, you probably have extra bumps because the sewers are kind of recessed right now. So basically, my point is, if something could be done about those lane widths and bring them down to, 10 feet would be great. If there's a replacement bus route on, maybe it has to be 11. But otherwise, you're going to get a real spike in traffic speed unless something's done about those, especially through some of those intersections. If you have a green light and you have the extra turn lane where there's extra pavement, that won't cause kind of a visual signal to slow down, or actually it will remove a visual signal to slow down for drivers by just having an extra 8 or 10 feet of asphalt there on the side instead of a curb. And maybe there's some opportunity to fit in some of those bike lanes if those curb widths come down. And then kind of echoing what Brian was talking about, at Van Aken and Buckeye, especially, and Shaker Square to a certain extent, crossing at any of those intersections, it just feels like an epic endeavor because of how wide it is. And it really seems like that is I understand why some of those streets are the way they are when they were designed, but that was 100 years ago, plus. And so right now you see a lot of speeding because of the amount of pavement right there, and crossing those really becomes harrowing. And as another question, as long as we're talking about Shaker Square, I don't know where the whole Shaker Square saga stands, but is that at least part of this conversation of what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, if there's going to be a redo of Shaker Square, if Shaker Boulevard is going to be requested to be closed, if
It's a good question is, so that within this is Shaker Square plan, they developed kind of what it would look like around the square and how the parking would operate. Is that part of what you guys are looking at implementing as part of this?
No,
okay.
we're dealing strictly with Shaker Boulevard. Shaker Square is separate.
Yeah.
Okay.
Stuff.
But that plan is on hold.
Yeah, and good. I have no idea what's going to happen with that plan, but I think it's at least worth being in touch, because if there's going to be a request from someone to close Shaker Boulevard in the square, or even if that's still on the table, it's at least something to take into account. And even if not close, if they have something else in mind, they're going to want to have their 2 cents on what the heck happens with that. I don't even know who they is at this point because I've lost track. But yeah, I don't see NP and Belver and Carr, whoever else. But I could see, this is total guesswork, but I could see a request like, okay, if we don't close it, maybe there's like, can you raise Shaker Square or Shaker Boulevard within the square or something like that. There's 1,000 different things that could come out of that whole situation, but it's gonna be worth having that on your radar, because that whole thing is just a lot. But I have a feeling there's going to be something coming out of that one way or the other. And then, the only other, if a bike lane goes in the center, this kind of becomes less of a thing. But when it comes to if we're going to try to put something on the outside, it might be worthwhile to reach out and talk to some of the property owners about. There's probably excess curb cuts. Some of those properties probably have two driveways where they could perfectly well have one, that kind of thing. So that might create some space to add something in terms of like a tree box, and B, it would allow for a safer bike route if something goes on the outside of those streets. I don't know if something's going to come of that either, but it'd be worth at least asking. It's a decent chance to consolidate some of that parking that's behind some of those buildings, or at least the curb cuts for them. And other than that, I pretty much would just echo some of the comments that all four folks have made already. So making it easier to cross for pedestrians would be kind of the principal angle that I would come from.
Great. It's my turn. I had a few things here. I guess first thing I wanted to ask, somewhat of a question, somewhat of a comment for the future, is whoever pulled the crash data for the corridor, I'd like to see just, what the main types of crashes were. I mean, we don't need like detailed crash diagrams or anything, but I think that would be helpful in terms of, when we're making considerations for, complete and green streets for all modes of travel, if there is really a vehicular crash problem, let's make sure that we're not making something worse, putting people in danger with, some of our other recommendations. So again, I'm not really sure. I'm sure I can look up, these crashes just as easily as anyone else. But if we're going to put the information to the group,
You've done some synthesis that we can send.
sure. And then one thing, I looked at this briefly early this week, and, just from a scoping standpoint, I pulled up county GIS, and it seemed like we could have a major issue with right of way, at least west of the square. It looked like all of the existing walk was outside of the public right of way. Luckily, I did check the intersections, and it looked like all of our kind of crosswalk, curb ramp facilities at all of the intersections should be okay in terms of right of way, but if we were considering or making any recommendations, for anything with the existing walk, that could be a major factor. Like if there was any consideration for a side path, like, removing that existing walk and building something new outside of the existing curbs. Again, it seemed like that could be a major issue in this corridor. It's just something to consider there. Other thing I wanted to ask was, what's the city's latest feelings on, high visibility crosswalks? We've seen like lots of different, designs, everything from stamped concrete to brick to, just high visibility markings to, some newer stuff like stamped, kind of like a thermoplastic. I'm really interested to see how that turns out on 185th. My perspective, some of these designs look really nice visually, but might not honestly be the best for all modes and, for handicap people. As far as specifically like brick and stamped concrete, it looks really nice, but try pushing a walker across it. It's not going to be very comfortable, or even a wheelchair. So just some things to think about. I don't know what the city's current, preferred high visibility crosswalks are, but
I can speak to that generally, and then others can add on briefly. We have experiences with actual pavers and crosswalks that are difficult to maintain and cause major accessibility issues, so we are not using pavers in the roadway. We do colored stamped concrete, especially in areas that have some sort of streetscape plan or overall streetscape identity and aesthetic desires, and have had good maintenance experience with colored stamped concrete in general. And that surface is relative, the stamping is not deep. So I think the accessibility and walking or wheel experience on those isn't negatively impacted by the designs. We have gone back to retrofit some of those to add the ladder style high visibility, traditional high visibility markings on top of them because of, I think, some of the contrast issues that you might be referring to between the asphalt and then the red, is kind of the same general. There's not as high a contrast there as the white ladder style markings. And an issue we have had with that is that the thermoplastic markings don't adhere to the concrete as well, and so that is difficult. That's one difficulty with those. So I think there's not a policy that we have, but some of the things you're alluding to are things that we're working through right now. In general, high visibility ladder style markings are a priority for us on safe routes to school crossings or other pedestrian priority areas. They are an additional maintenance burden for our restriping crews. And so when we can do them in thermoplastic through capital projects like this, we like to do that so that they can be longer term, more durable. And then when those wear off, or when we are installing them with more of the annual water-based paint, having to do ladders rather than just the two transverse lines is a significant additional time commitment for crews and slows down their general across the city. So that's a jumble of information about how we approach crosswalks.
sure.
But the recommendations that you saw on the slide are specifically for those intersections where the school routes are crossing and where there is some higher neighborhood crossing volume because of parks on either side of the border and things like that. I think at this point, when we say high visibility crosswalk markings for this project, we're thinking about thermoplastic ladder style. But that could be open to more.
Sure. I think sort of the main points that I had that weren't already brought up. I know Brian really hit a lot of design considerations right off the bat, so. Yes.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a whole lot to add, but the one question I did have is there was a reference in here to the possibility of a multi-use path. That $7, $8, $9 million cost estimate that you threw out there, would that include that aspect? Oh, okay. Because one thing to consider when you're talking about trying to cobble together funding is we have various programs that might be eligible for such facilities. Not the least of which is our CMAC program, which we're going to announce an application around at the March board meeting for April, I believe, is when the application. I forget what the application deadline is, but
I believe sometime.
I'm sorry, May. And the target year for that, for those, the funding availability would be fiscal years 27 and 28. So this, it might line up pretty well with that schedule that it's a little later than the schedule you've offered, but we could, perhaps working within that.
Did you say it'll open in March and then due in the May timeframe, or it will be announced in March and open?
Announced in March and due in May.
Ed, is that, I know you mentioned CMAC, is that where the intermingling of funds with the carbon reduction program is
Yeah,
happening? So there's a little bit extra money?
Right, and the CMAC budgets are much higher than the CRP funding, but nonetheless, we would be co-mingling that as well.
And is the CRP funding, is that on the same timeline as the CMAC,
Yes.
fiscal year 27, 28? Okay.
Actually, let me retract that. Yeah, let's say
Okay.
the CRP funding, right now, the BIL goes through the end of fiscal year 26. But the supposition is that there will be, a continuation of that program.
Okay.
And then also, with respect to other commingling funds, you have to make certain that all the respective programs align. If issue one money is available at the same time that SDBG funding might be available. So that's just something I'm a little mindful of. Other than that, I think it was very interesting and gratifying to see that the incorporation of these completing Green Street's elements for the city's program and the WACA's program, and it's good to see.
So in terms of kind of protocol and next steps for us, is it good for you just to get all of our comments out there? Do we need to come up as a group, like ones we agree on? I'll tell you what I prefer.
A couple of different ways. What would be helpful for us as the city is to have a somewhat unified recommendation from you guys. Like, if Steve and Jacob really disagree about what should happen, we would like for the tact to resolve that and make a recommendation to the city. I think there are some things to maybe talk about in terms of timing. The slide earlier laid out that, we want to be able to have your input, vet it, evaluate it, and then report back to you at the next quarterly meeting what we feel is realistic to incorporate into the project, and then that factors into the exceptions and rationale that we post online. So that's the timing thing, but I think in terms of the specific process of how we get there, we're open for navigating that together.
I mean, is it worthwhile to us send you our comments that we discussed, and then you guys can compile them, and then at the next meeting, then we can say, hey, these are ones that are in contradiction of each other? What direction would the board like to go?
We would like to have a city, we need to have a city scope set by the time of this. So any sort of negotiations or interaction needs to happen between now and then, and in advance for that recommendation to go through the city's process to have that scope finalized.
I mean, I don't think I really heard anything that contradicts anybody else's comments here. It's more of a just well, there's a couple of different ways to kind of go in order to do that, you know, it's, hey, bike lanes, we all kind of, hey, bike lanes are good here. But there's just different ways you could potentially do that, which might be more, hey, as you go through the
Yeah.
design process.
Right, I
And
would
not
also
really,
point to Rick or Tom's expertise here, but you don't have to answer everything in the scope, right? It's saying the elements that we want to investigate for inclusion. As we get into the design process, there will be things that work and don't work for all sorts of reasons that we can foresee here. So I don't know that we need to, like, investigating bike lanes within the curbs is something we could.
Well, I think going in, you should know, you're gonna be able to solve it. Would be nice. So, like, this is a principal arterial, so we're governed by, ODOT LND. We need one from 12-foot length, but also we don't need one. So, you know, there's things that.
There's exceptions to
rules
that rule though.
We have to comply with in order to get federal money.
There's exceptions to
Something
that.
we go through, something.
But Tom, there's exceptions to that 12-foot rule that the cities utilize, and we work with other communities to utilize exceptions to that 12-foot rule. So I just want to make sure that what we're saying here, if we're saying something, we have to have 12-foot. We need to make sure we're noting there are ways around that if the design that we want to see requires.
So I would recommend that given the time, we will deal with exceptions and justifications for those when we get to that point in the process. But in terms of understanding, like, I've been taking notes, I think Clay's recording this right now. We can write up what we heard here today and send that out to you guys within the next 2 weeks. And if you can have a week or two to review that, turn that around so that within the next month, we have a clear shared understanding of what the TAC is recommending. And that gives us 2 months to work that through the internal process and refine and improve that. Does that sound good?
So my question for everybody here, so if they send us all of the comments that we made, are you guys comfortable with me kind of distilling them down to points we want to see included? That then the city would, and then we would all agree just via email. And then that's what the city would post to the Complete and Green Streets website. This is what the TIAC wants to see happen. Here's what we can or can't do. So you have basically points that you guys can then share with the larger audiences in terms of transparency. Does that make sense? And is everybody else okay with me taking that role as long as I represent your thoughts properly?
No, that's fine. We'll give it a shot. We have to tweak that
Yeah.
process. We will.
Does that work for you guys, Jamie?
Yeah, it works for us, and I think this is all gonna be iterative, so, you know, let's try this, and if it doesn't work for you guys, you know.
Yeah, I had a little bit different.
Pass it around the board for their comments.
Yeah, I'll share it with them and yep.
Yeah, I had a little bit different idea maybe for future meetings is that, you know, if we get this kind of preliminary information out to the, you know, group ahead of time, maybe we can submit, you know, talking points prior to the meeting. And then, you know, as a group, we can talk through those kind of talking points and already kind of have, you know, a starting point for those recommendations. That way it's a little bit easier to, you know, sort of put together those meeting minutes or, you know, the recommendations for the city. And then instead of kind of trying to put that together after the meeting and then having to go through like a concurrence, you know, we've kind of already set it up ahead of the meeting. We can tweak it at the meeting as we discuss it as a group, and then we're just left with more of the concurrence after the meeting. You know?
Big picture, we would love that and appreciate that, and maybe you guys can incorporate even a Google Doc where you can all add your comments in advance, and you have a live document that then gets sort of, you know, edited, if you will, agreed upon, if you will, before the meetings. So I agree.
I'll also say that in the governing policy for this committee, you guys have the freedom and authority to create bylaws or any sort of governance structure that you think is appropriate amongst yourselves. And so understanding that there will need to be some communication within the TAC in between these meetings, just to keep that in mind as we learn and evolve and iterate this together. You know, if you want things with a certain amount of notice that you need to follow your internal review process that you guys want to set up amongst yourselves, then we'll do what we can to get things to you within that.
I was wondering if we were gonna get that notice.
Yeah. Morning, my battery is getting low, so.
Okay. Jacob, I think we're about out of time.
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah, so I think just in terms of next step, you guys will send over the comments. I can kind of try to distill them down into what our points would be, and then distill them back to you guys for approval, and then I'll send them off to Jamie.
Mhm.
And then hitting on Steve's point, maybe for the next meeting, maybe getting the project packet a little earlier, and we can do some of that kind of
Yep.
collaborating, putting our notes together, so we can come here and hopefully leave here with the final one for the next round.
So a little earlier, you mean like 2 weeks, 3 weeks?
I was thinking more like at least a month. I mean, this guy's got to talk with an RTA crew. I'd probably talk with my advocacy committee. You'd probably talk with sewer district folks. If it's possible.
Well, in month in advance, I would ask if
Next quarter, we
I'm not sure what but they did.
if anyone has written comments they'd like to submit, like Brian, you already have yours prepared. But as we are compiling our notes, you guys send that to us by like mid next week at the latest. That would be helpful. And Jacob, I think what we'll get to all of you will be somewhat distilled already. Like we're not gonna have verbatim minutes from this meeting coming out unless you tell us that's something that you would find very valuable and worth the time investment. But so I guess first benchmark, if Brian and anyone else that has written stuff can send it by Tuesday or so next week, within 2 weeks from today, we'll have the list out to you for your review.
Maybe if you don't have red notes, make just bullet points, of what you wanted to get across to us for inclusion, that'd be helpful too.
Who should we send those to? To you, Kelly?
To Clay and me at this point. I will send a follow-up email, before the end of the day tomorrow, just
Yeah,
with
with
a
the
little bit
recording.
of some of the things that we promised to send and anything else like that, so you'll have both of our.
You know, something, I don't know if one ever went out, and if it did, I must have missed it, but like just a spreadsheet of all of us and the contact info, maybe with the city.
Oh, no, it's okay. Yeah, but we'll send it electronically because we have one, but we didn't set it up. So yeah, great.
Well, I thank everybody for your insights and participation today, and look forward to kind of continue to build this ship. And Callie mentioned bylaws. I don't know, we'll see. Maybe some sort of standard operating procedure.
There you go.
How we review projects and all the feedback.